welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So a little bit about this book and also like my experiences with nonfiction. So I'm not the biggest fan of nonfiction, and I have high respect for people who regularly read it. I've outside of just things that I've read for school, I generally don't care for it. I don't read it a lot. I've read the occasional memoir, but nothing, it's just not my thing, you know? This has been the only nonfiction book that I've read this year, again, outside of required reading for school, and this is one of the only nonfiction books that I've read from start to finish. All Boys Aren't Blue is a memoir written by George M. Johnson, talking about how he navigated childhood and adulthood as a queer Black person, and how Blackness and queerness impacted his life both separately and together. I was enthralled by Johnson's writing style. I finished this book in about a day. I am not a slow reader, but I get easily distracted. So, you know, I start to read and then I'm uncomfortable. So, you know, I get up a little bit, stretch, and I go get a glass of water. And then I go talk to my cousin about something I saw online, and suddenly, you know, it's like, oh, it's close to noon, I'll make lunch, and then, you know, 10 hours have passed and I only got through chapter 1. It's a testament to his writing style that I was able to finish this in one day with minimal distractions. It just kept me engaged so much, and on top of that, this book actually gave me a proper book hangover. For 2 days, I couldn't read anything else. I just sat there and just kind of quietly contemplated this book and thought about when I was going to reread it and how I was going to reread it. I've spoken about my weird inability to highlight books. I've tried and I simply can't bring myself to do it. If I dislike a book, it's easier for me to mark it. Like I'll like use a pencil to underline things, but I'm working on finding a way to properly annotate a book that feels satisfying to me and helps me get over this weakness, as my partner likes to call it. So far I've found post-it notes, and like I said, it's easier for me to annotate something if I don't like it. So this is Wayward Son by Rainbow Rowell, and towards the end I just wanted to finish the book so badly that I stopped annotating it, but I don't know if you can see, but I have a shit ton of yellow sticky notes. Yellow sticky notes is everything I hated. Pink sticky notes were things that I found were okay. There is a ratio of 1 pink sticky note for every 5 yellow sticky notes. If you want to know, we'll talk about that at some point. But yeah, when it comes to like reading a book that I enjoy, I can't do it. I can't do it. I don't know what it is. I don't want to stop to annotate either. Like I use the sticky notes and I like that I can remove them because I like the impermanence of them. But like marking and highlighting a book feels too real to me. Like I'll have to acknowledge the fact that this was a line I liked or didn't like this line, and you know, but when I was reading this book, I originally read it on my e-reader, and I have a Kobo e-reader. It's Clara HD, I think. It has a pretty good highlight function. It allows me to go through all my highlights and all that stuff. And every page, when I was reading this book for the first time, every page I was using that function to highlight everything. I just couldn't stop, and about halfway through the second chapter I said, fuck it, I'm gonna have to buy a physical copy of this book, and I'm going to have to sit down, reread it, and highlight it, and I really hope I do. I don't know if I'll, oh my god, I don't know. I kind of want my partner to read it first, and then like I'll go through it, but like I'm like So I read this book as a part of Queer Blackathon and as a part of MB Book Club. I'm going to be answering MB Book Club's discussion questions on it, and I'll link a post to where these discussions are from if you want to check it out. If you are interested in MB Book Club, it is a non-binary book club. The books selected either have trans, non-binary characters or are written by trans and non-binary authors. This month, I believe they're reading No Man of Woman Born, and next month they'll be reading The Death of Vivek Oji. Big shout out and thanks to Jesse from Bowties and Books for starting MB Book Club and being a part of Queer Blackathon, and also to MB Book Club's June co-hosts Brandon and Audrey for facilitating this discussion and helping to create these questions. So the first question is, a theme of All Boys Aren't Blue is wearing a mask while privately exploring one's inner truth. How does this state of duality impact George and non-binary people across the diaspora? What was so impactful for me was seeing that how, as a child and even into adulthood, George wasn't able to grow as a queer Black person. He could grow as a queer person and he could grow as a Black person, but he could not truly grow in both of these identities at the same time. But when it came to hiding these parts of himself, he found that he had to hide both of them at the same time. Outwardly, these aspects of his life seem to be entirely separate, but internally, they occupy the same space. And in my own life, I have felt like this to some degree. I am more visibly queer than I am visibly Latinx, and even then, I could hide both of these aspects of myself to protect my safety. When it came to exploring my queer identity as a teenager, I did have to wear a mask of full whiteness in order to do so safely. Wearing a mask can be so damaging because you can't truly be yourself in any aspect of your life, and just it hurts a lot. It really does. You denying one part of yourself, denying two parts of yourself in order to survive. Favorite quote. My favorite quote, I actually have two. I wrote two because I'm a tricky little bastard. So my first favorite quote, and this one is my favorite, like my top favorite. I got to live in my totality, and for the first time ever exist as both Black and queer in the same space and be loved for it, not shame. Like I said, the beauty of George M. Johnson's writing, just the style, it's not fluffy, it's not overly lyrical, but it's beautiful and simple and truthful. We deserve to exist entirely with no aspect of our identity to be dissected to be palatable to another, because we are worth more than the sum of our parts. And just the joy I felt reading that line, I got to live in my totality, was just so beautiful. And then my second favorite quote, I want the words of my life to be immortalized. I want to immortalize this narrative of joy and pain, this narrative of triumph and tragedy, this narrative of the Black and queer experience that has been erased from the history books, an experience that has been here forever. I think that George got his wish when he wrote this line, when he wrote this book. He got to immortalize not just a piece of history for himself, but a piece of history for Black queer people. And it's so small. It seems so innocuous, but one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. I'm so excited to see how this is going to be turned into a TV show. I just want to see George M. Johnson succeed because he does deserve to be immortalized. I'm going to technically answer the next three questions all together because they're very similar and my answers for them were so basically the same. How did this memoir expand your ideas about gender nonconformity? Did George's gender identity speak to you? What revelations did George's story speak? So when it comes to gender identity and gender nonconformity, it can look like anything. I currently identify as gender fluid. I feel as though I'm not stuck in one. I am constantly shifting and flowing between my masculinity, my femininity, my gender neutrality. But there's always this constant thought of, what if I am just non-binary? What if I am just a trans man or just gender non-conforming? But because there's this need to find the perfect label, the one that fits you exactly. I feel like this memoir has helped me tune myself into a direction to get to the place where I can become the person I've always wanted to be, if that makes sense. I do struggle a little bit when it comes to who I am as a person. For most of my teenage life, I identified as a woman and I identified as a lesbian. And while my attraction to women has never changed, again, my gender, how I present myself has. So the idea that I can, that gender nonconformity could just look like putting on a pair of cowboy boots. And much like George when I was younger, I did create a persona for myself that I used to describe my gender to me. It was a way to explore my identity without coming out to myself fully. I tried to describe this to other people and they didn't really get to, like, the people who I described it to just didn't really understand what I'm talking about, and one of them was like, that just sounds like dissociative identity disorder. I'm like, I don't think I'm different people or different personas. It's more like in my head, To find somebody else who felt the same way was so relieving. To find this book, to find something that I hadn't even thought about since I left home, described so perfectly, that fitted my experience to a T. It felt special. That really is the only word that I can describe it. It felt special. I felt this kinship with a person I have never met before, thanks to our shared experience. And this is the reason why I said I wish that this was something I read in high school. I was very confused as to how I should present my gender. Do I present as more masculine? Do I present as more feminine? And I never thought that I could just take the pieces that I wanted or needed. And this book felt so freeing, and I'm really glad that it exists, and I'm glad that I can recommend this to friends, colleagues. For the last question, this one I can't really answer very well, and I'll explain it in a little bit, but we'll get to it. So, number 6. George has discussed the meaning of the word blue in the title, tying it to the movie Moonlight. What parallels to Moonlight do you see reflected in George's story? I haven't watched Moonlight, not from lack of trying. I really, really want to watch it. The problem is my partner D wants to watch it alone first because they're afraid that they're going to cry their eyes out. I can't comment on the parallels to Moonlight. This book was an experience, and one that I wish I could have had much younger. I cried so much reading this book. There was hardly a moment where my eyes weren't misting or I wasn't full on crying. And I do highly recommend this book to basically anyone. It's a very good book to just sit and ruminate on because there's so much we can learn from each other. And I learned so much from George M. Johnson, not just about, his own experiences, but how the collective queer experience is so similar and so different, especially when these stories are coming from people of color, specifically from Black people. We tend to forget that there is a privilege in white passing. There is a privilege in being white when it comes to being queer. But even then, our experiences, in terms of internal experiences, can be so unifying. So, thank you for watching this review, and I do hope that you pick up this book and give it a try. And other than that, adios hermanos.